do the kickoff procedure. We're going to have the 1970 Stanford Indians kicking off to the 1967 USC Trojans. Both teams will be in normal mode. Trojans expecting a normal kickoff, and Stanford will do a normal kickoff as opposed to a squib or an onside kickoff. So for a normal, all we're going to really need to do is roll our 2d6 and our d10 for the variable yardage. Now let's take a look. We've rolled an 8 with a variable yardage 3 on the d10. Let's go over to Stanford. Let's find the first string offense. Let's zoom in on Horowitz here a little bit. Okay, an 8 is result code 51 in the far right column under KO. So 51 is 50 to 59 yards, but we said we rolled a 3 on the D10, so we have a 53-yard kickoff. Okay, so 53 from the 40-yard line that it was kicked off from puts it at the 7. So USC will be returning from the 7. Let's get all 5 dice, give a roll. Now let's see what the D20 shows us. We have a 3, so we have a D20 of 3, and under the platoon card here of USC kickoff return in the left column, NOR 3. Looking across, that's the center, Bill Adams. Okay, looking across at Bill Adams' rating, we see a 7N. The N is not important. He's not returning. This is not a squib. This is not an onside. So we're going to ignore the N. We're only interested in his 7. Now let's find out who Bill Adams matched up with on this kickoff from Stanford. His 7. Okay, here we are at Stanford's column, and under the normal, it's a little more jumbled than the kickoff return ordering. We see that the 3 reads across to actually the kicker, Steve Horowitz, and a reading across his rating is a 1. So we have a 7 minus a 1, which is 6. Now let's take a look at the D10. Now the D10 was a 5, so that's the kickoff return team is going to win that matchup, because it was 7 minus 1 was 6. So 0 through 6 on the D10 was going to be won by USC, and if it was a higher number, then the coverage team. But Horowitz is the kicker. He's pretty weak at coverage, so it's logical that USC's return team should have won this matchup. So let's go find out, back to USC, which letter grade we're going to be using now. Now, like I said, we're going to ignore the letter grade of N on Adams, even though he won the matchup. He's not doing the returning, he's just doing the blocking. And so, return man number 1, Earl McCulloch, is actually doing the returning. O.J. Simpson, return man number 2, would only have been doing the returning if specifically the 14 through 16 indicated over here would have come up. All other die rolls, 17 through 20, and all these other ones, blockers, are defaulted to return man number 1. So it's Earl McCulloch and his J rating. So let's go to the return table and look at the J rating for Earl McCulloch, or anybody rated J. Firstly, we'll take a quick look at McCulloch's long frequency value to see if in fact he's got a better long return than the default 2 6-sided die roll of snake eyes or 2. So here we are in McCulloch. We found him on first string. He's the split end on the first string platoon, and in fact he does have a better return long than on the default of 2. He's got it on a 5. So let's go over to that J column on the return. Well, as luck would have it, we actually did roll that 5 for McCulloch's long frequency. So on the J column here, we see that's a 21, but we're going to ignore that. It's now McCulloch's long return. Let's go back to McCulloch and find out what his actual long return is instead of the result code of 21. Okay, here on McCulloch, kick return, here's the J, and his long in the parentheses is 61. So instead of result code 21, we have result code 61, which is a 60 through 69 yard gain. Scanning over at the D10 is a 5, so we have a 65 yard return for Earl McCulloch. Note, I actually throw two D10 die, a different colored D10 die, so I don't have to re-roll the D10. So it just so happened that both of them were 5s. So that's return all the way to the Stanford Indians 28 yard line. Now let's say Stanford was afraid of McCulloch and his long return ability, and they wanted to squib it instead. We still would have had the D20 showing us, of a 3 showing us the kicker going against the center. And my cards have the actual result code. The older cards have a 5 with a plus, meaning result code 51. Regardless, so a squib also would have been a 53 yard kickoff. And as you see, the FW, forward winger, the left winger, right winger, back winger, etc. These guys can now be actual kickoff returners on squib kicks. It's just not returner 2 Simpson and returner 1 McCulloch. We'll note that on rolls 1 through 5 down here, on squibs we're also going to have extra chances going to returner 2 Simpson rather than just strictly to returner 1 McCulloch. So in this case, the 3, it wasn't a normal return to McCulloch. If it was a squib, we'd actually be using, per this instruction, a return to O.J. Simpson, returner number 2. Now, so a squib, we see that Simpson is actually a 7F61. So he has the same long, 61, but he's not in the J column, he's in the F column. And his long frequency return is a 7, not a 5. So let's look at the F column. So the squib to Simpson under the F on the 5 is 31. And the second D10 that I rolled, or the second die I used, is a 5. So Simpson would have only got a 35 yard return as opposed to McCulloch's 65 yard return. And remember, because Simpson's long is on the 7, not the 5, we didn't switch this 31 to his long of 61. It stayed the 31, thus the 35 yard return. And if you recall, under the matchup, under that dice roll 3, it was the center versus the kicker, and kicker Horowitz was a 1A, so his column is an A. So had Horowitz, the kicker, actually won the matchup instead of a 5 on the D10 that gave us the returning team winning, let's say it was a 9, so that Horowitz actually won the matchup. Well, as you can imagine, he's fairly deep back, and so his rating is not going to be very good, thus the A. So in fact it would have been a 41 whether it was a squib or a normal. So we would have had a 45 yard return for either Simpson or McCulloch, depending on whether it was a squib or a normal. And lastly, let's look if it was an onside kick that we were doing. Under the 3, we'd have the left tackle going up against the defensive right tackle, or the returning team's right tackle. See that little 11 is a result code of 11, so it would have went 15 yards. And lastly, we see here the 5 that we rolled on the 2d6 on an onside kick. 3, 4, or 5 being rolled is actually recovered by the kicking team. So if Stanford chose to onside kick, they would have recovered this one. The last thing we'll need to discuss is the D12, which can do penalties and fumbles.